The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains of the Miller household, casting a warm glow over the cluttered breakfast table where Bill sat staring intently at a piece of paper that looked as though it had survived a natural disaster. His wife, Judy, leaned against the counter with a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, watching the subtle play of emotions across his face. She asked him if there was anything special he wanted for his upcoming birthday. Bill looked up, a mischievous yet hesitant glint in his eyes, and remarked that he did want something, but she might find it dirty and degrading. Judy did not miss a beat as she replied that she was absolutely not changing the oil in his car. Bill shrugged his shoulders and muttered a quiet whatever, but Judy would not let it go. She reminded him that this was a big milestone because he was turning 40 years old. Bill winced at the mention of the number, pleading with her not to remind him. He felt as though his life was already 1/3 over. He held up the tattered list he had been studying, explaining that he had found this list he made 20 years ago. It contained all the things he had promised himself he would do before he hit the age of 40. Judy looked at the paper with a raised eyebrow and teased him that at this point, she was pretty sure he could play drums with the band known as REO Speedwagon if he just went down to the county fair and asked them. Bill ignored the jab and pointed to the items on his list, mentioning whitewater rafting and entering a triathlon. He sighed, realizing that he kept postponing all of his dreams. He admitted that he had originally made this list for when he turned 30, and he had simply changed the number 3 to a number 4. Judy suggested that he just change the 4 to a 5, and Bill, feeling a sudden sense of relief, agreed that changing the number again made him feel better, although he still thought a whitewater rafting trip would be fun. Judy told him to pace himself because they still had 10 years before the next big milestone. The preparations for the celebration began in earnest as the week progressed. Judy sat in the living room, finalizing the details for the big night. She announced to the family that the reservation was set for Friday night for the birthday dinner of Bill, involving the whole family. Linda, who was always ready with a witty remark, noted that Friday was not so good for her, to which Judy responded with a smile that Friday was therefore perfect. When Linda asked where they were taking him, Judy revealed it would be the favorite restaurant of Bill, a place called Beefy Porterhouse. Linda mocked the name, imitating a cow, and asked if that was the restaurant with the sign featuring a smiling cow begging people to eat him. Judy confirmed that it was indeed beefy. Bill chimed in, dreaming of having the turf and turf, the sirloin soup, a steak salad, and perhaps some kind of wine that had beef in it. Their young daughter, Becca, mentioned that her friend Cammie had a pony on her birthday, but Bill insisted he would stick with a steak. Tina and the other girls then shared their own surprise, telling their father that for his birthday this year, they were going to bake him a cake from scratch. Bill was genuinely touched, thanking the girls and admitting that he might actually cry from the sweetness of the gesture. Linda whispered to him not to cry because there would be a backup cake, and Bill whispered back a thank you to God, noting that while the girls were nice, one should never screw around with cake. Since Linda was going to miss the actual dinner, she decided to give Bill his present early. She explained that it was not easy shopping for a man who seemed to need everything. She handed him a spa certificate for a day of beauty. Bill looked at it, somewhat confused, and asked when she was going, but Linda clarified that the gift was for him. She suggested he could get a facial, a manicure, or a pedicure. She joked that it was really more of a present for Judy, since Judy was the one who had a front row seat to his appearance every single day. Judy laughed and told them to cut it out, insisting she was completely happy with the way Bill looked. However, the light-hearted atmosphere shifted slightly when Brian walked into the room. A powerful and rather unpleasant scent followed him like a heavy cloud. Judy asked what that smell was, wondering if Brian was wearing a large amount of really bad cologne. Linda commented that it felt as though an Old Spice ship had come in with a full catch. Bill realized he had given Brian a bottle of something with a horse on it, and Linda wondered if the horse was actually inside the bottle. Brian, feeling self-conscious, announced he would be upstairs, and Bill decided it was time for a father and son talk. Bill entered the room of Brian, advising him to stop moving around because he was creating a breeze that spread the scent. He sat his son down, telling him that when a young boy grows up, the world opens up for him. He opened a window And when Brian complained that it was freezing, Bill told him bluntly that he stank. Brian was mortified, asking if it was really that noticeable. Bill encouraged him to talk about what was going on. Brian confessed that he had started wearing cologne after gym class because he perspired so much. Bill laughed gently, telling Brian that he was just like his father and that he had the Miller engine. He explained that Miller men are sweaters because their powerful engines throw a lot of heat. When Brian mentioned using antiperspirant, Bill dismissed it as useless, comparing it to sprinkling pixie dust on his armpits. He told Brian that after exercise, he had to take his shower seriously, getting into all the creases and doubling back if necessary. Brian then admitted the truth, which was that he was not comfortable showering with the other guys at school. He felt different from them, noticing that his body was not the same as theirs in certain places. Bill realized that Brian was self-conscious because some boys had developed and others had not. Bill suggested a plan where Brian could stall in the gym, perhaps helping the coach put away equipment, and then take a shower after all the other boys had gotten dressed and left. Brian thought the idea could work, even if it made him a little late for his calculus class. He thanked his father for the guy's stuff talk, feeling relieved. Later, Bill reported back to Judy, claiming he had handled the delicate problem competently. He explained that Brian had been skipping showers because he was at a tender age where some boys were changing and others were not. He compared Brian to a roll of film that had been sitting in a purse since last Christmas, meaning he was undeveloped. Judy felt terrible for her son, imagining him standing in the shower looking scrawny and pale. She wanted to go talk to him, but Bill insisted he had it under control. He argued that men communicate differently, often through grunts and gestures, and that Judy was now out of the loop while he was in. However, the situation grew more complicated the next morning. Judy, trying to be supportive in her own way, packed a healthy lunch for Brian along with an article from one of her magazines about loving the body one is in. Brian was horrified to find an article titled 6 Sexy Strategies to Feel Better in the Buff, along with lip gloss tips. He realized that Bill had told Judy about their private talk. Brian felt betrayed, even though Bill tried to explain that he did not keep secrets from Judy. Brian snapped that this was supposed to be guy stuff and that he was humiliated. Bill tried to reassure him that the locker room was not a competition and that there would always be someone with a larger physical presence, but Brian interrupted, asking why he had to be the one who stood out. It was then that Bill realized the truth, that Brian was actually more developed than the other boys, not less. Brian begged his father to keep this a secret because he felt like a freak. Bill promised he would, but then he immediately went and told Judy, who then told their friend Glenn, who told his wife, and soon the whole neighborhood seemed to know. When Brian found out that his secret was public knowledge, he was furious. He retreated to his room, refusing to speak to Bill. Judy tried to intervene, explaining to Brian that she was only hurt that he did not feel he could talk to her. She tried to have a clinical discussion about nature and the beauty of the human body, but it only made Brian more uncomfortable. She eventually realized that she could not bridge the gap in that way and told Brian he needed to make up with his father because it was his birthday. Brian reluctantly agreed to go to the dinner, but remained cold toward Bill. Bill, desperate to regain the trust of his son, decided to share some of his own most embarrassing secrets. He picked Brian up after practice and confessed that when he was a kid, he had once eaten a whole can of dog food because it looked good, and he had even drunk the water from the bowl. Brian was shocked, but Bill went further, admitting that as a teenager, he had practiced kissing on his German shepherd named Tessie because he was nervous about a date. Finally, Bill confessed that sometimes, when it was hot, he liked to sleep in the old maternity underwear of Judy because they were roomy and felt soft against his skin. Brian was stunned but moved by the willingness of his father to humiliate himself just to make Brian feel normal. Brian finally forgave him, and they shared a heartfelt moment. However, as they walked into the house, they realized that Judy, Linda, and the girls had been standing nearby and had heard every single word of the confessions of Bill. The room was silent as the family processed the information about the dog food, the dog, and the maternity underwear. Bill looked at their faces and realized he could not face them. He decided he needed to go to the bathroom and stay there for a while. As he walked away, the rest of the family stood in the kitchen, unsure of whether to laugh or cry. They decided that they would say nothing but happy birthday to him and pretend they had heard nothing, although Linda noted she would never look at a dog the same way again. Despite the awkwardness, the family came together to celebrate, realizing that their flaws and secrets were what made them a family. They gathered around the table, ready to face the future, one birthday at a time, with love and a good amount of beef.